commandments of science is mistrust arguments from authority. Authorities must prove their contentions like everybody else. This independence of science makes it dangerous to doctrines less self-critical or with pretensions of certitude. Think of how many religions attempt to validate themselves with prophecy. Yet, has there ever been a religion with the prophetic accuracy and reliability of science? Is this worshiping at the altar of science? Is this replacing one faith by another? In my view, not at all. Science is forever whispering in our ears. Remember, you're very new at this. You might be mistaken. You've been wrong before. Despite all the talk of humility, show me something comparable in religion. The directly observed success of science is the reason I advocate its use. If something else worked better, I would advocate for something else. And that's from Carl Sagan. You're probably wondering why I'm wearing this shabby rain jacket to give this morning's sermon. Well, I'm not expecting it to rain in church, but I want you to see what I mean by positive atheism. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited by Channel 5 to be on their Talkback Live show to comment on a bill to put the Ten Commandments on state capitol grounds. But when I got to the studio, the producer took one look at my t-shirt, shook his head, and said that the bad word on my shirt was unfit for a family news show. He asked me to cover the shirt with this jacket to protect the viewers from the message on this shirt. Now, perhaps the younger people in the audience might want to hide their eyes, but it says, "Smile, there is no hell." But isn't it interesting that a family news show would censor hell, a word of primary biblical significance to most fundamentalist Christians? Yet, "Smile, there is no hell" is an important message of positive atheism. We don't believe in hell or eternal punishment, and that's worth smiling about. Positive atheism sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? After all, atheism really is a negative word. It means not having a belief in any gods. We're all born atheists. But negative is not always bad. Other negative words are independent, non-discrimination, and antidote. Even religious people frequently describe their deity in negative terms, like infinite, unlimited, infallible, and 80% of their 10 commandments, the 8 thou shalt nots, are also negative. The only two positive are honor your parents and remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Though we can't really decide on which day the Sabbath falls or exactly what holy means. And negative protesters found the dominant religion in this country, protesting, which we pronounce Protestant. Many atheists, however, are uncomfortable with the negative word, and not just because it's been demonized in our culture. It says what we don't believe rather than what we do believe. After all, we don't go around calling ourselves a Easter bunnyist or a tooth fairyist. Other labels that some atheists prefer include humanist, secular humanist, agnostic, rationalist, freethinker, skeptic, and materialists. While there may be fine distinctions among these words, which we like to argue about, I think it comes down more to a matter of taste than to deep theological and philosophical differences. And I even know a number of atheists in this very church who proudly call themselves Unitarians. But I find it strange that so many religious people think atheists are either immoral or fools, just because we subject religious belief to the same kind of scrutiny as any other belief. After all, the person making the claim is responsible for providing evidence for it. No disproof is required to reject or withhold support. For instance, suppose I tell you that the universe was created just 5 minutes ago at 11:29 a.m. and that a supernatural being planted false memories in all of you. You can't disprove my claim, but you still think it's nonsense, right? And atheists have the same reaction to God beliefs. Now, coming out as an atheist can be scary, a little like leaving the comfort of your parents' home. Believing in a heavenly Father who will always take care of you might be reassuring, but it's important to distinguish between the world as it is and the world as we'd like it to be. Religion is a lot like politics. You get more followers by making big promises. Atheists, however, want to maximize happiness without compromising on truth. But happiness isn't everything. As George Bernard Shaw said, the fact that a believer is happier than a skeptic is no more to the point than the fact that a drunken man is happier than a sober one. Many former religious believers say how good it feels to be rid of unnecessary fear and guilt. They no longer see themselves as worthless sheep dependent on grace from a heavenly Father. My wife, Sharon, says she wasted many years as an indoctrinated Catholic trying to know, love, and serve an imaginary being. She's now much happier and more productive in knowing, loving, and serving real people. But a viable alternative to theism must also meet our moral and emotional needs. Since this is the only life we have, we want to make the most of it. There may be no purpose of life, but we can find many purposes in life. It's not true that atheists believe in nothing. An atheist has a naturalistic worldview, that is, without supernaturalism. There are plenty of mysteries in nature by which to be awed. Science shows us the wonders of the world every day. And how do atheists make moral decisions? I believe we should be guided by the expected consequences of our actions. We don't consider acts to be right or wrong simply because they're found in holy books written a couple thousand years ago, unless we can justify them on real-life moral ground. We're committed to the application of reason, science, and experience to better understand the universe and to solve human problems. We're convinced that the plight of the human race, indeed of the planet, is in our hands, and that social problems can be solved by methods that we ourselves devise and test. No God will do this work for us. Immortality for atheists is the good works that live long after we've disintegrated. When I die, I know exactly where I'm going. I'm going to medical school. Just like my Jewish mother always wanted me Russell summed up positive atheism nicely. The good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. Now, I know that Unitarians are likely to agree with much of what I've said so far. I was surprised to learn that humans and chimpanzees share about 90% of their genetic structure. And if a gene for skepticism is ever discovered, I think it'll show that liberal religionists are more like atheists than like their conservative counterparts. I think fundamentalists in all religions have more in common with each other than they do with the liberal wings of their own religions. On the other hand, though I may agree with well over 95% of positions taken by Unitarians, I want to spend a little time on the other 5%. This is my understanding of most Unitarians, and please correct me later if I'm wrong. You take pride in your tolerance for all faiths, as long as individuals are not harmed. When an atrocity is committed in the name of religion, you're likely to say it was based on a gross misinterpretation of the tenets of that religion. And we must recognize the overwhelming good that comes from most of its followers. I disagree. I think many such fundamentalists are not misinterpreting their religious texts. On the contrary, they're taking their religious faith very seriously. The good books of the major religions really do contain passages that support violence and vengeance, with decrees by God that infidels must die. Fortunately, liberal religionists of all faiths ignore such parts because they are appalled by the same holy passages that atheists find so horrendous. I think Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg said it best: there will always be good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. Most of us grew up learning that it was rude to discuss politics, sex, and religion. Actually, in my house, nobody told me not to discuss sex because the word sex was never even mentioned. But politics and sex are certainly not taboo. But criticizing a person's faith is still socially unacceptable. It's considered virtuous just to have religious faith, meaning a conviction that can't be shaken by contrary evidence. Well, why should we automatically show reverence to someone of great faith? Respect for religious faith, whatever that faith might be, plays an important role in perpetuating human conflict. We must not be so open-minded that our brains fall out. As social critic H.L. Mencken said, even a superstitious man has certain inalienable rights. He has the right to harbor and indulge his imbecilities, provided only that he does not try to inflict them on others by force. He has the right to argue for them as eloquently as he can, but he has no right to be protected from the criticism of those who do not hold them. He has no right to demand that they be treated as sacred. He has no right to preach them without challenge. Of course, many people of faith are inspired by their faith to do good. Nevertheless, as one who favors critical thinking, I'm sometimes bewildered by their beliefs. For example, faith that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, cheated death and rose bodily into heaven, and can now be eaten in the form of a cracker called communion. A few Latin words spoken over a cup of wine, and you can also drink his blood. Is there any doubt that if may construe the mere questioning of faith or presenting alternatives to it as negative atheism. I disagree. Is it unseemly for the secular humanists of the Low Country to have T-shirts describing us as a non-profit organization? Profit spelled P-R-O-P-H-E-T. My favorite pun. We also have license tags that say, "In reason we trust." Guided by reason instead of by faith or profit is who we really are, and this should be no more insulting to Christians than their wearing crucifixes is insulting to us. Let me give an example of what I would consider to be negative atheism. I often hear a religious person say to me, "I'll pray for you." A negative response would be, "Okay, I'll think for both of us." But this hurtful reply would only offend a presumably well-meaning person. I think the best response is, "Thank you." However, if an opportunity presented itself, I might get into a discussion about the efficacy of prayer with questions like, why would an all-knowing, all-loving God change his mind because you asked him to? Or why would a God who ignored the prayers of millions of Holocaust victims take a special interest in today's Super Bowl game? But I would only engage a person who seemed receptive to such a discussion. To sum up, atheists live by principles that can change based on evidence, not by unchanging commandments. We don't give credit to a deity for our accomplishments or blame satanic forces when we fail. We take responsibility for our actions. I think the conservative former Oklahoma Congressman J.C. Watts had it right when he said, "Character is what you do when no one is watching." By that definition, only atheists are really in a position to show good character. But along these lines, I've coined a more inclusive term, which I call functional atheist. A functional atheist is one who acts as if there is no God. These are people who do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because of future rewards or punishments. This would include deists as well as most Unitarians. A talk radio caller, who was definitely not a functional atheist, once said to me that as an atheist, I probably feel free to go out and rape and murder and do anything else I think I can get away with. I responded, with an attitude like that, I hope you continue to believe in God. Also, I once debated a fundamentalist minister on whether people can be moral without a belief in God. One question I asked him during the debate was how he would behave differently if he stopped believing in God. He said he might cheat on his wife were it not for his love of Jesus, knowing how much it would hurt Jesus. I responded that my love for Sharon, knowing how it would hurt her, was all I needed to keep from cheating. Whether to base decisions on God's needs or on human needs is the essential difference, in my mind, between a conservative religionist and a functional atheist. As you can probably tell, I admire people, religious or not, who do what they think is right without regard to rewards in this or an expected future life. Though an atheist, I'm regularly called to play the role of a judging God when I decide which of my students shall pass and which shall fail. My decisions are based on whether students learn the subject matter, not on whether they praise or flatter me. My grades for them are independent of their beliefs about me. And if my atheist position is wrong, and there really is a judging God, I hope she will judge me on my behavior rather than on whether I believe in her existence. And finally, I'd like to thank Bill Upshur for inviting me here today, and many thanks to the Unitarian Church for being one of the few churches that would tolerate a sermon from me. I must confess, which I'm told is good to do in church, that I always wanted to be a preacher, but the God thing got in the way. That's why I chose the next best call. I became a professor so I could profess, if only mathematics. But in closing, I notice I'm missing one of my favorite parts of professing, or speaking in public forums, namely the questions, comments, criticisms, and lively conversation with the audience. So I'm looking forward to your feedback at the coffee hour that follows this service. Thank you for listening.